Welcome back to our special on the Caledonia land dispute. Aren Plante is a resident of Caledonia and has studied the history of land disputes between Six Nations and Canada. Aren, there is a long history of the Six Nations of the Grand River in this Haldimand area. Tell me about that.
Thanks, Maggie. So, of course, Canada has been home to Indigenous people since time immemorial, but the Haudenosaunee, or Six Nations, are relative newcomers to this part of the world. So during the American Revolution, many of the Six Nations had supported the British Crown, and after the Americans had declared independence and successfully defeated the British, many of them were forced to leave the American territory. And as compensation for their valor under the leadership of Joseph Brant, the British granted the Six Nations, or Haudenosaunee, 6 miles on either side of the Grand River. So that's really how they arrived in this part of the world.
And so land has been a part of disputes for quite a while for the Six Nations and the county. Tell me about the history of these land disputes.
Yeah, so really from on the onset of the Six Nations arriving in Haldimand and in this area, there was conflict. The Haldimand Proclamation, which granted the Six Nations 6 miles on either side of the Grand River, was originally disputed by both the Crown and the Six Nations about exactly how to measure that 6 miles and what was that going to look like. And over the time, so Joseph Brant, who was the chief at the time, or self-proclaimed chief, he began either selling or leasing lands to various settlers, and as a result, the land became smaller and smaller. And right away, there was disputes about, was he selling the land? Did he have the authority to even sell the land? He wasn't elected necessarily by the Indigenous peoples. He was chosen by the British Crown. So although he played a very important role as a Mohawk leader and a Mohawk warrior, it was a different type of relationship to the Crown. So that land became smaller and smaller, and inevitably, because of that, conflict erupted, particularly in the early 2000s and again today.
So whose land is it?
I think that's the million-dollar question, Maggie. I think at the heart of the conflict is that question. I think it really comes down to worldview and how do you answer that question. To some people, this land has been Indigenous lands for time immemorial, and it doesn't really change hands. And many Indigenous people, particularly leaders, have a different concept of land ownership and transfer. Well, from a sort of a liberal democratic perspective, as many sort of Europeans would have, it's not the same. So that really is the question. Whose land is this anyways? And I don't think we're anywhere near finding out where we're going with that.
So who are the key players, you would say, in this particular dispute that we're seeing in 2020?
And really, the players haven't changed much over the years. We have the federal government, we have the Six Nations elected band council, as well as the Haudenosaunee Confederacy Chiefs Council. Those are some of the most important players. But of course, we also have the provincial government, the Ontario Provincial Police, and Haldimand County. And what makes this dispute so controversial and so complicated is that for the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, they want a nation-to-nation relationship with the federal government. So although some people say, well, they're just a form of local government, they're not in their perspective. They are a sovereign nation, they've never relinquished sovereignty, and they want to be treated that. It's supposed to be a Crown Indigenous government relationship.
So how do you see this specific dispute being reconciled or finding some sort of solution?
I think really, Maggie, at the end of the day, it's too soon to tell. I think this is going to be an ongoing conflict. I don't think anytime soon this is going to come to an end. I think really what people need to do to deal with reconciliation is to know their history, to know how the Haudenosaunee arrived here, and to know how Europeans and settlers arrived in this area, and how, in the end of the day, no one's going anywhere. We're both going to be here for a long time, and finding a way to live in peace and finding justice is really essential.